Hello my friends, it's the Hawk. But for once today, I will be speaking out of character, and I'm not the Hawk. There was a little something I wanted to address, and I've been meaning to make this video for a month or so, and I think it's important that I do this now, especially with this TNA shows in England coming up. It is essential I do this now because it just makes sense. Over the years, people have found it hilarious that I like TNA so much, and they don't understand the obsession. And there's actually a storyline behind that. A real-to-life story which affected me, and it explains everything. Now, the story starts off back in about 2009, 2010, and I'm living away. It's my first time living away from home, and I'm living in this place called Bournemouth, which isn't a bad place. It's a little seaside town. Thought it would be quite fun to live down there. Turns out, not good for me. The Hawk is a massive introvert in real life. I find it incredibly hard to communicate with people and make friends. So this just wasn't a good idea for me to move like a couple hundred miles away where I can't know anyone. And it was just a hard time for me on the whole. And I didn't really have much happiness back then. I was a completely different person back then. I hadn't really figured out who I was going to be. I was very sad. I was probably depressed, to be honest. But back in 2009, 2010, that wasn't really a thing for men. Like, you couldn't really say you were depressed. Like, it was unheard of. It's all over the news now. But back then, you were just sort of told to just get on with it. In fact, you didn't really discuss it with anyone because you'd be embarrassed. So I have to say it's a good thing that that's changed. But anyway, back to the story. So I was pretty much all alone, and I'd be spending every night walking around the streets. I was completely nocturnal at this point because I had no reason to be anywhere at any time. And I'd just be a lonely figure in my hooded tracksuits, listening to music, stomping around the streets, looking for something to do. I was pretty much a complete loner. And I was going through a few drug addiction problems back then as well. I wasn't a crackhead, don't worry. The Hawk could never be a crackhead. But it was just an extremely sad time for me. There wasn't any happiness at all for me. The only small bit of happiness I would have is I would tune into the TNA show once a week. And the reason I chose TNA over WWE is because I was always taught in my life to kind of root for the underdog. I will always root for the underdog because I feel like when they achieve something, it just means a hell of a lot more. There's no point cheering on the big dude because they're going to win every time anyway. So what's the success story there if they win something? They've already won. So it means something more when a company like TNA can pull in 2 million viewers. That's a massive deal for them. And it felt like you were part of the family and you had something to get behind. So I was a big TNA fan in the first place because of that, and it was really the only show I was following back then. All on the message boards, everyone would say they hated WWE, but yet they'd still watch it, and I found that very hypocritical. So because I said I hated WWE, I just flat out never watched the show, and that was it. And then there was one night where really my loneliness got a bit too much, and I remember I was sat on this bench, sort of looking out at the sea, and I'd had a few too many drinks at this point. And you know how it gets sometimes. You can feel a bit down as a man when you've had a few drinks and you're having a bad time, and it kind of takes you to this bad place. It does the opposite of what you want alcohol to do at this time. And I remember sitting looking out at the sea, and I think I stayed there for hours, just sort of contemplating ending it, essentially. Now, ultimately, I came to the decision that I'm not a suicidal person, but I did have thoughts. And I remember messaging friends back then, like ex-friends, to see if anyone was interested in my fight, and nobody was. And it made me feel more alone, and it kind of made me feel like if you want to get somewhere in this life, you have to kind of rely on yourself and yourself only, and you can't expect other people to sort out your problems. And maybe that is the wrong mindset to have, but that's how I came up. So yeah, I was in a really extremely bad place, and after that night where I'd kind of been contemplating the worst, I remember I bumped into this guy the next day, and we weren't really friends. His name was Lewis Haley. I don't no idea if he watches these videos, but if he does, get in contact, my friend. We randomly got talking, and it turned out that we were both TNA fans, which was quite rare in itself because you don't really meet TNA fans. If anything, it was going to be a WWE fan. Now, as we get older, we lose a lot of our memory and we forget small minor details, but for some really strange reason, I can remember that this Lewis fellow really liked Chris Sabin. He kind of looked like him and had the same haircut. And for some reason, he was also infatuated with Madison Rayne. And believe it or not, when she had the blonde hair, the Hawk was quite infatuated with her too. It might not feel like it given some of the stuff I've said about her, but she was quite nice and tasty back in the day. It's weird what you can remember sometimes. So we instantly hit it off to a level where he told me that TNA was actually going to be in Bournemouth that next week. And I'd contemplated going, but because I was a young, unconfident guy with a lot of issues going around my head, I didn't really want to feel like I could attend this Bournemouth show on my own. Even though I loved wrestling, I didn't feel like I could go somewhere on my own. And it was awesome that this other guy had said, let's do it, let's go to the Bournemouth show. So I was dead up for that. I get comments all the time asking why so many Europeans are fans of TNA Wrestling. And the fact is that TNA was on a free TV network in the UK, whereas WWE you had to pay to watch the show on cable. So that's why there's more TNA fans in Europe, as it seems. But anyway, I digress. So we went to this TNA show, and instantly it was the best day of the year for me. It really put things into perspective in my life. I suddenly felt like there was almost something to live for. It sounds really silly, but I was having a really bad time, and this was by far the standout day of my entire year. It was the only happiness I'd had, and it was so much fun. It was almost surreal for me, coming from such a depressed position, to be almost within touching distance of stars like Perc Angle and AJ Styles. Seeing such famous and incredible athletes really gave me hope in life. These guys were a true inspiration to me when I was at my lowest point. Just being able to see them gave me some hope in life. It maybe gave me the kick up the ass that I needed. TNA was great at fan interaction. And you just felt like part of the show. And then in the foyer, the beautiful people were meeting people, and the Hawk got as close to Velvet Sky as he could, but security almost threw me out. But no, it was an incredible show, and I loved every minute of it. And from that point on, for me, TNA became more than just a TV show which I could pick up or drop. It was now something which I was really rooting for, and I really wanted to succeed. Which is why it hurts me to see them where they are now. A glorified indie company. But I will always respect TNA because they've given me the career. Essentially, I started out making videos about TNA. You guys tuned in because you wanted to hear about TNA. And it took me to where I am now. So again, I have to give back to TNA. I will always love the company for that. But it just makes me so sad to see where they are now. I'd give anything for them to turn it around. And I know they're poor. But you don't have to spend loads of money to create some decent storylines. I would help them for free if they were interested, but I don't think they're interested in me because they're more interested in contacting What Culture and people like that. Cultaholic to try and push stuff for their show, a channel which has pretty much ignored them for years. Yeah, that kind of hurts, but it is the geek narrative which is going around in wrestling right now. You have to conform, everyone has to be all happy clappy, and nothing can be wrong in the world. But it is wrong. TNA should comfortably be able to be the third best wrestling company right now. And I'm not even sure it's the third best anymore. It makes me extremely sad, but the Hawk will always have respect for TNA because it almost, in a way, saved my life. I was stuck working a dead-end office job, I was miserable all the time, I couldn't do anything creative, and due to TNA Wrestling and their crazy creativity of the storylines back in the day, no one can say they weren't creative with their storylines, good or bad. But that gave me something to talk about and helped me have a creative output. So for that reason, I'm glad TNA is still around. Be that Impact Wrestling. But it just really hurts to see the show now, with so little creativity, when it was the perfect show for someone like me, to help take my mind off everything, with all the crazy shenanigans and antics that they had going on back in the day. It was almost like the Attitude Era Part 2. Obviously a bit worse. But it wasn't boring, and it caught a young Hawk's attention. For that reason, we should try and support Impact, even if they're not interested in our opinions. Maybe they'll listen one day. But for now, I just thought I had to share that story with you, and why the Hawk likes Impact Wrestling.